There's so much going on in the CASPer world, so many new things, so many changes. I'm excited to dive in because one of the questions that comes up all the time is just, what is CASPer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to start. And CASPer is something that I'm really passionate about because I've been working on developing, iterating it, et cetera, since my career back at McMaster University where it was first developed. And so I've been at this for oh gosh, over 15 years now. It's been a long time. So let me talk to you about CASPer. CASPer is an online situational judgment test that's been used in medical selection for over 10 years. It really looks at the ability to effectively reflect on and communicate solutions to interpersonal and professional dilemmas using critical reasoning and social interpretation. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that CASPer broadly measures 10 aspects of your personal or professional attributes. It does it across 12 sections, which are situational judgment sections. So instead of traditional interview questions that you may see, tell me about a time when you type of questions, situational judgment test questions actually put applicants in a particular scenario. So in our case, across the 12 sections, you'll see 8 video and 4 text-based scenarios. Then you'll learn about the scenario itself, and then you'll have 5 minutes to type your response to 3 open-ended questions. So rather than saying, here's the scenario, what's the appropriate or effective response, you actually need to generate the response. So you need to think about what you would do in that situation and why you would engage in that course of action. So the goal with CASPer is to give that broad measurement. Now, interestingly, CASPer is measured and evaluated by members of your own community. So the raters for CASPer are trained raters. They get implicit bias training. They get other psychometric training that we need them to have to be raters. But they're meant to be as representative of the population as the population that you as a physician will one day serve. So you have 12 unique people looking at each individual response is rated by a unique person. So you get 12 unique people giving you a perspective on how you did across these scenarios. That's a lot.
That is a lot, and it sounds challenging. One of the biggest things that changed last year, and we talked about it a little bit last year, was scoring. It's always been this kind of secret veil that's hidden behind everything is, what is my score?
Right.
I don't know my score. What's the point of this? Because I don't have a score. You
Right.
started to send scores last year as some testing. What did that testing look like, and what's the plan moving forward?
Right. Great question. Because I think people, really want to know applying to medical school is an incredibly complicated process. And the more information and transparency we can have around it, the absolute better. And I'll be honest, that's part of the reason I love what you do here and your pre-med day, because I think it just opens up this fairly confusing process so that people can be walked through it. They can hear different perspectives, et cetera. So we heard that from applicants. We heard that they want to know how they were doing on the CASPer test. It took us a little while to get there. And in part, that was because we didn't want to just give people a score that may have been actually really confusing. And it may have made them think, should I be applying or should I not be applying? How do I use this information in my application process? So we spent a couple of years trying to gather information. And then last year, we actually piloted it across a couple of schools where we released scores for a subset of applicants if they applied to particular US med schools. And what we wanted to look for was feedback from those applicants on the process. We wanted to understand the clarity of the information we were giving them. And we also wanted to hear from the programs and schools if it resulted in a lot more confusion in their process or if it actually helped. So that's what we were trying to dig into over the course of that process. What we found is that providing applicants with their quartiles. So which quartile did you fall into? So did you fall in the 0 to 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and or above 75 to the 99th percentile of performance? Where did they fall? And what we found is that that information was incredibly useful. And why it's useful is that it gave them a sense of where they fell, but also they have the knowledge that there are many medical schools that actually accept people across all quartiles. So if you fall in the bottom quartile, that does not mean don't apply. Absolutely not. That just means that schools can then use that information to give you more support when you come into training as well. So it gives them a broad interpretation of who these are. It's meant to be an additional data point for programs as they make decisions and as they look at the entire application process. Because in all honesty, it's hard for programs to truly still get a sense of who the applicant is. So the more data they have, the better.
Yes, I agree.
So
Let's go ahead.
I was going to say, so this year everybody's getting those quartiles, nice. And you'll be getting them 1 month after you complete the CASPer test.
Okay. Following the AAMC's methodology, let's make them wait a month. Keep them on their toes. Let's talk about some big changes going on. Hey, CASPer.com is no longer the direction of where we're going. Where are students supposed to be going now?
So you've moved from TakeCASPer.com to TakeAltus.com. Okay. And the reason for that is that instead of just offering one test, Altus is in fact offering a suite of tools to help support you. And the reason behind that is we know in assessment when we're measuring who somebody is as a person, there's no silver bullet. There's no single score that's going to tell you everything you need to know about who an applicant is or allow an applicant to actually present themselves to the program. So what we're looking to do is make sure that we can provide as much information as possible about who you are as an applicant to the program in a way that they can actually digest that information. So moving from just CASPer to other tools that we think are going to help you present yourself as a person to these programs.
So these other tools have been coming up all the time. Dr. Gray, what is Snapshot? What is this Duet? I say, I don't know. Let me talk to Kelly on National Premed Day, and then I'll get back to you. So what are these new things, these new torture devices that you have for pre-med students?
Well, I hope they're not torture devices. Let me clarify a little bit about how they're different from CASPer, maybe just in terms of the process for students. Yep. So for anybody who's familiar with CASPer, what you'll know is that you have to pick a test time. And you pick that test time, you can adjust it if you wake up not feeling well in the morning, et cetera, like that's all changeable. But there is a set test window that you need to complete that in because it's a proctored assessment. However, with Snapshot and Duet, you can complete them at any point in time up to 10 days after you write the CASPer test. So you can do it when it's convenient for you. You can hop on, you don't have to do them both together, you can do them separately, and it just allows a little bit more flexibility. So I want to get that in there first. It's not that we're extending the time window that you have to sit and write CASPer for. So the two other pieces of information that we're hoping will give programs a better picture of who you are as an applicant is first Snapshot. So Snapshot, we think, provides you with a chance to stand apart even well before your interview in demonstrating your communication skills and your self-reflection. So with Snapshot, you answer standardized questions, which are going to get sent to each program to rate. So if you remember, CASPer is measured or assessed by members of your community who rate the test and then provide those scores to the program. With Snapshot, we actually send the videos to the programs and they provide the ratings of it. So they're able to look at it through their own mission and lens. We provide implicit bias training and a standardized rating scale for them to use that on. So it helps them really identify applicants who stand out. So it gives you that chance to, I don't know, come alive a little bit from your application process and really present who you are.
So let's chat here. You're a friend. AAMC, how is this different than the Vita tool that the AAMC created last year and then decided to kill this year?
Right. Well, the goal with our tool is that it's meant to build on the constructs that are measured in CASPer. So CASPer cannot measure your communication skills, and it can't measure, your ability to sort of interact and why you want to be a physician and answer those questions. So it's a little bit different as well in terms of the rating process itself. We have everybody complete Snapshot so that it's one and done. It's done during your admissions process. You don't have to think about it later on in the process versus sending out invitations later, which can be a little bit more confusing. So we're trying to bundle it all together. And similarly, the way it's looked at by programs, we have a standardized rubric. They can add multiple raters to it. and have a look through it. We suggest that it's really just for a subset of applicants who they need additional information on. So when we've trialed this out, where it's been useful is if program or applicants are coming from maybe schools that particular program isn't familiar with, or they really are getting down to their last few interview spots. And they're really trying to tease apart the pieces of the application process. And they're trying to find information that's really going to give them those standout applicants. So then they've been able to watch Snapshot and sort of find people that go, I really need to bring that person into interview. I need to get them in and hear their story.
The questions that are asked during Snapshot, are those from Altus, or are they suggested by the school? Where do those come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're blueprinted to be looking at things like communication, motivation, self-reflection. But we actually have subject matter experts from the programs, et cetera, who help us construct and review these scenarios. So while they are standardized in that they come from Altus, we have the input of the schools or the programs to make sure that what we're doing is actually useful information and additive to what they're already getting. So we don't want to have applicants jump through a hoop that's just redundant information that schools are going to get anyway. This is meant to be additive and incremental to what they're getting.
Okay. Are those questions secret, or are they available for students to know beforehand?
They're not too secret. I think there's some available, and there are practice questions too. I should say, I want to clarify that. So there's practice scenarios that you can do, and you can do those. There's 2 practice scenarios, and you can do those as many times as you want. So similar to the CASPer test, there's a full practice test you can do. So get familiar, get used to the test, practice and hear what you sound like, and it gives you the opportunity to reflect and do it again if you want to.
Awesome. All right. So CASPer, Snapshot, and Duet.
Duet. Yes. Duet is a little bit of a passion project for me. It's something that I really, really like. I'm an assessment geek. So from that perspective, I get excited about things that may not excite other people. But Duet is really a measure of alignment between applicants and programs. And so the goal of it is to help get a sense of not fit, because I think fit implies that there's a single type of person for each program or a single program for each type of person. But it's really to get a sense of alignment and to, at the end of the day, ensure that we can create a good environment for these applicants. So the way I describe it is that some people, are just going to grow anywhere. They're a bit, like weeds, if you will, in that they'll grow and they'll do, become the best possible learner in whatever environment you put them in. But some of us are actually a little bit more susceptible to getting into the right environment, the right context in order to grow, be the most resilient that we can possibly be, and have the best learning opportunity. So for us, finding the right type of school or the right type of program to go into is really important. And right now, that's a really difficult process to measure alignment. And oftentimes it's done in a really unstandardized way that introduces a lot of potential implicit bias into the process. So, questions that might get asked at interview to try and gauge fit sometimes are one-off questions that are really, really inappropriate or may not really actually tell them anything about the applicant. So the goal is to create a standardized way of measuring this. Now, last year, we actually piloted this for the first time in GME. So we introduced it in GME, had it done across programs and applicants. And this year, because we're beyond the pilot, we're actually releasing to applicants Duet profiles. So when I complete as an applicant to GME, I'll get a sense of what I said based on values and beliefs. And let me talk for a second about how Duet works, and I think that might clarify what that is. So across Duet, what we look for is across 3 different categories. There's 7 different factors, and we ask you to rank each of them. The example I give all the time is when we were home in COVID, my kids wanted another pet. And if I asked them, do you want a cat, a dog, a fish, a bird, or a turtle? They would say yes to all of them. And if I said, which one do you want? They would say all of them. Because for them, they're all things that they would want. And so if I ask them, well, do you want a cat or a dog, a cat or a fish? And ask them to pick between each of those pairings, what I would actually get is a numerical ranking of their order of preference of these things. And so in a bit more of a obviously medical school aligned way, Duet does the same thing where it takes things that we all value, like diversity of the faculty and the type of learning environment that you're going into, and it asks people to prioritize them as compared to other things that they would also value. And so there's no wrong answer there. It's just a matter of your own individual preference and how that might align better to different programs. So what we do is we create an applicant profile. So I would complete it once as an applicant. And Ryan, if I was sending it to your medical school, what would happen if I was sending it to the Ryan Gray Medical School? You would have a variety of different faculty and current medical students actually complete Duet through the lens of your program to create that program profile. So it's not just the admission dean's perspective of what their program looks like. It's actually a combination of faculty and current medical students who give that sense of what that profile is, and then that's compared to each other.
So you created Bumble for medical schools.
In a sense.
I like long walks on the beach. Oh, you do too. Great. We're a match.
Hopefully in a little more relevant way to creating a supportive learning environment.
It sounds completely logical to have something like that, right? The biggest complaint that I get from students is my eyes are tired. My brain hurts. I went and tried to read mission statements and vision statements on medical schools, and they all sound alike after reading 10 of them. And I just have no idea if I'm a fit there. And it's so hard to navigate websites, and a lot of schools' websites are still from like 1990. And it's a struggle for students to try to understand where that fit comes in. And I talk about it all the time. It's so important. And students, unfortunately, not enough students listen to me to know that it's not just stats. Stop using stats to apply to medical school and look at fit and find a school where you are going to just thrive at, even if your stats are below what they're saying their median is, or their 25th or 10th percentile is, whatever it is. And so it makes complete sense that there literally is. It's a dating tool for medical schools and pre-med students to try to understand, hey, like you and me, this looks like it's a thing. Let's talk. And it's logical. I love it.
And it's one piece, right, of a very complex puzzle. So the more we can open that up, the better. This year we are just piloting it. So we're trying to get a sense of what that looks like and refine the tool, obviously. So what we think will also be helpful to applicants next year is not this year for the pilot, but next year when we launch it fully, is that we'll actually give you part of your profile. So these are the things that you've said are important to you. And I think that type of, information allows a lot of reflection about where they're applying to, what they're thinking, and where their priorities are. So we're hoping that's also going to be useful.
So here's another challenge, because I love challenges. I've started a book, I haven't finished it yet, called Personality Isn't Permanent. And so what it sounds like Duet is, which I think we should have a name change to Tango, because it takes two to tango, would be amazing. But what Duet sounds like it is kind of like a personality test of just what is motivating you, what do you enjoy, that kind of stuff, right? How and I don't know if you have data on this yet, but how will those change over time as students learn more about who they are, as they maybe go and shadow a new physician or get some different clinical experience, and now their preferences are changing? Are they going to be able to update their Duet?
Well, and I think that's one of the important pieces that your previous guest touched on, is that every experience applicants have is going to influence them, and it's going to change them. And so for Duet is only valid for that one application cycle. And programs will get your Duet information again. So it takes us about 2 to 3 weeks to score a CASPer test, which is why applicants get their score after 1 month, is that they're getting it pretty much as soon as they're available. But for Duet scores, you have 10 days to submit it, and then that score goes directly to the applicant or to the program. Now, we know that over the course, if applicants are reapplying, that needs to be redone each year. So similar to the CASPer test, our expectation is you may have changed as a human over that course of time, or your thoughts or ideas might have changed. So we want to give that opportunity. During the course of the application cycle, though, that's locked in. But you do have the opportunity when you go in for interview or other touch points with schools to sort of start talking about it and start how saying, maybe even doing Duet caused you to reflect on some of the things that you value or think about how you're doing them differently. And I think that, every time you do an assessment, there's a learning opportunity there to reflect on your own self.
Awesome. I'm excited for these new tools.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about cost at this point, because unfortunately nothing in life is free. Right. We know that CASPer costs a little bit of money. What does Snapshot and Duet look like at this point?
So right now there is no additional cost for writing either of those tools. So that's part of the reason that we're offering them broadly this year. We also know with the pandemic, there's been implications to everybody across the board. And so we do want to make sure everything is static. There's no cost that we're talking about for students to write or distribute Snapshot or Duet. That's all within a single price point now.
Okay. The biggest question always is, how do I prepare for CASPer? And now, how do I prepare for Snapshot? How do I prepare for Duet? What is that going to look like moving forward?
Absolutely. So we think about the preparation for each of them individually. So I'll just talk through them. For CASPer itself, we have a full practice test and a technical requirements test. And so what that means is the technical requirements allows you to use the computer that you're going to use actually on test day. My suggestion always is to do it at a similar time of day that you're going to be writing your test. So you'll understand if your roommate is streaming videos at that point in time, you may want to ask them to pause on your test day, just so you can ensure that you've got the best possible environment to complete your test. But we encourage you to do that and to do the practice test as well. That practice test you can do as many times as you want. What it allows you to do is get familiar with the format of the test. And as we update the format, so for example, this year we're adding closed captioning for all applicants who write the test. You can do that. The practice test is updated too. So you can really see what the environment is that you're going to write it in, gives you a sense of the timer and where everything is. So it really allows you to feel like you know what the test is like before you go in. And that's one of the most influential pieces. In addition, we're going to be emailing you out tips and tricks. There is a webinar, though, that I would encourage everybody to go and watch before they write the test. And I think, Ryan, you guys have the link, so we'll share that afterwards. Please go and check out the full webinar. It was done by both our research and applicant support team, who genuinely want to make sure you have the smoothest test experience possible. And they're going to make sure that you have everything that you need. And of course, you can reach out to them before, during, or after the test as well. When we think about Snapshot, there's, again, as I mentioned, practice opportunities there. So there's 2 practice snapshot scenarios that you get to do. You can do that. You can watch and review them, get a chance to do them again if you want. There's the link right there for the webinar if you want to grab it. And it does
comments for everyone too.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Yep. And it does have information in there on Snapshot and Duet as well. So it talks about the practice process. You can see what it looks like a little bit, and we just encourage you to do that. For Duet, there's not really any preparation needed. What we've heard so far for the applicants who have written Duet so far this year is that they're all pretty okay with the way the format is. They find it easy to navigate once they get in there, so it's pretty self-explanatory.
One question that came up here is how long are you talking for Snapshot? What does that look like timing-wise?
Great question. So you have a maximum of 2 minutes for each of the 3 questions you're responding to. So that's why it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on if you're including the practice test or taking some water breaks or things like that in between. But you have about 2 minutes. And again, there is a timer. We don't think you need the full 2 minutes, but we don't want to rush people through it. So you get the chance to answer the question. You have 30 seconds to read the very short question and also reflect. So the timer doesn't start until you've got that 30-second reflection period. Similar to the CASPer test, you'll notice that we added a reflection point in time if you've ever done it before. So you'll see the scenario, you get a chance to reflect before the timer actually starts to answer that question. So it gives you a chance to take a deep breath.
Similar to leaving a voicemail, you always get that option. Do you want to re-record? Press 1. If you're happy with it, hang up and you're fine. If I record a snapshot and I go, oh man, I stumbled, can I go retry before I submit?
So in the actual snapshot, there's no re-record option. In the practice, obviously, you can do that as many times as you want. The reason being is that people understand the context in which you're recording Snapshot. Even as I'm talking now, I'm stumbling over my words occasionally. I'm clarifying a few things that I said. And that's just part of the way we normally interact and engage with folks.
Yeah.
And so it's meant to be authentic. It's meant to come across as who you are as a human, not, this perfectly polished thing that says all the words, but doesn't actually get across who you are.
Yeah. What other big changes? I know one of the things that Altus does is they get a lot of feedback from students so that you can continue to improve what you're offering and making sure that it's as valuable as possible, not only for the students, but the schools. What other kind of changes will students see if they've taken CASPer previously or any of the other things and moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. That's a great question. So we do try and change it every year. We don't believe that there's ever an assessment that's going to be perfectly static and last for a decade. It's that we want to iterate it. We want to improve it based on feedback we get from applicants and from programs and from other stakeholders that we engage. So we're constantly trying to improve it. So I mentioned a couple of the changes that you're going to see. So there is that reflection period that's been added, chance for you to take a deep breath after you see the scenario and think about what it is that you want to say. You don't see the questions until after that reflection period, but it gives you a chance to process and think it through. One of the other changes is that we heard from applicants that, especially those who may have English as a second language or have other needs, that they want closed captioning as an option. So now, just like you watch on YouTube, you can turn the closed captioning on and off. You can toggle it between scenarios if you want it on for some and off for other ones, but it will remember your preference for the next scenario that you go to. So it gives you a chance to really figure out what you want. And again, you get the chance to practice that out and find out for you if that's a value or a distraction. And then go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question with the closed captioning. Now that you have closed captioning, potentially for students who may need other languages, will that be an option in the future?
Well, that's a really interesting question. That's not something we considered, but it certainly is something that we could research and look at.
Yeah, it may be interesting for students who maybe are ESL, but they're just stronger in comprehending their natural language or their primary language to be able to read it in their primary language, and now obviously needing to type it in English.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to make sure that there's not extra cognitive load by having to do that language switch. So that's probably something we'd want to test out. But we thought adding closed captioning does take away some of the barriers. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't also apply for other accommodations. Any student who needs an accommodation, we just need to know 3 weeks in advance of your test. But you can certainly apply for those as well. We've just taken away one of the things that were sort of broadly asked for by applicants with for different reasons.
All right. And what was the last one or next
there
one?
was one more thing I was going to talk about because we do want to iterate the test each year, is that we're actually have some experimental sections this year in CASPer. So after you complete the CASPer test, there's an exit survey that we ask everybody to complete, and that's where we collect that feedback. So please make sure you fill that out because we do want your honest feedback. We do want your perspective because we do consider it and take it into account as we're developing the test each year. But this year, after the exit survey, you get the chance to participate in an experiment that's really going to help us understand how we can keep improving the fairness of the test. So this year, we're looking at alternative response option formats for CASPer. So we know that each way of responding to a situational judgment test, each response format is going to have pros and cons. And the more data that we have to understand the different pros and the different cons and the way it impacts different applicant groups, the better a decision that we can make about how to change it potentially going forward, how to provide information. So we have 2 scenarios. So the experiment itself, or the experimental sections, will take about 15 minutes of your time. And so we ask you to, after you've done the exit survey, considering to complete these experimental sections. Again, it just is a different response format. So in this case, it's a video response that we're asking for. And then there's an exit survey after that. So giving us your honest feedback on after, as compared to the CASPer test, how were these other sections? We really want to know how applicants feel about them so we can take that into account as we make decisions.
So one of the things that always comes up, and I don't know if I heard this scenario last year and talked to you about it last year. And so, but there are new people watching this year, so I'll bring it up again if we did talk about it, is when you give these scenarios, people from different backgrounds are going to react differently to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a great example listening to a podcast once, potentially, of if you're in a store and you see a wallet on the floor, what do you do? And a white man like myself will go, well, I'll pick it up and I'll bring it back to someone or bring it to the desk or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And an African-American person may go, I'm not touching it. They're going to think I stole it, right? Stereotyping, unfortunately,
Yeah.
potentially the experiences that the BIPOC community has. How is that taken into account when you're developing the scenarios going, well, what's the BIPOC community potentially going to say based on their experiences in life versus a non-BIPOC, a white person, whatever? How is that taken into account when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion and stuff like that?
Yeah, there's a few different ways that I can speak to that. One is that we make sure we're engaging stakeholders in the review of the content. So that's first and foremost. And that looks different depending on the situation. So, I can give you an example. In Canada, we're very engaged with our Indigenous population. So members who are inside and outside of healthcare, to ensure that we create a safe testing environment for Indigenous applicants for the CASPer test. And that's ongoing work. Any of this work that I'm describing is ongoing. There's no great, we've had one meeting, we're done. It's this constant, how can we learn at Altus to make sure we take in different ways of knowing, different perceptions, and make sure that our test is really intersectional and representative of different voices in the community, et cetera. The other thing that we do is a lot of rater training. So one of the great advantages to having an open response so that you type in your own, what would I do and why, is that it does allow applicants to share their own journey and to share their own rationale, because there is no single right answer to these questions. They're complex and they're based on your own experiences and your own interpretations. And as you said, unfortunately, the stereotyping and all of those things that different communities have suffered through, and therefore that's going to change how you answer that question. And so by allowing people to answer with that why, and allowing us to provide enough rater training so that our raters understand there's going to be very unique responses to this, there's going to be non-traditional responses to this, and that those are just, there's no right answer to this. And allowing those different lenses and ways of thinking to permeate the test itself. So that's part of the way we address it. But we're always constantly trying to learn and improve. So, I have a feeling that when you ask me in a couple of years, the answer is hopefully going to be even more things that we're doing around that.
Any other initiatives going on at Altus for diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're engaging with our stakeholders, as I mentioned. One of the things that we do at Altus is we actually fund research in admissions. And we actually have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging stream within that research initiative. So we encourage people to apply for grants to do research in medical school admissions or other admissions areas, really focused on diversity and inclusion. So that's one of the ways that we try and promote it within the community. So it's not just our own lens of those things. But beyond that, we're also doing surveys that we think are going to be helpful to the community. So in this particular case, one of the surveys that we're doing is a mental health survey, looking at how, pardon me, CASPer applicants from different racialized groups may be suffering from different mental health. So we've got a survey that's going out along that as well, just trying to understand and improve our own ways of processes, ways of engaging, and ways that we can support the community. We're also obviously doing all the psychometric things around it. I probably should mention those as well, not to take them for granted, but looking at how each item responds differently to different groups, making sure that our test is, we're understanding where, if any, bias is coming in to our test and how we can change and improve that and mitigate it in the future.
Let's talk about cost for a second. A student just asked a good question about potentially being able to pay up front versus adding each school. Historically, the way CASPer has been paid for is a flat fee to take the test and then fees to transmit to each school. Has that format changed, that structure changed? And for those maybe who received FAP through
Mhm.
AMCAS or through a COMIS, what are options for students where there's a financial barrier?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking that. We do honor FAP. So if a student qualifies for FAP, please let us know, because then there's no cost for writing or distributing the test. That's part of our commitment to making sure the test is accessible, and then we're not putting additional barriers in. From a total cost perspective, that hasn't changed from last year. So it's $12 to write the test and $12 to distribute it to each school that you're sending it to. So that's stable. Obviously, no change or increase in the cost because we don't want to do that. We're always looking at cost modeling and making sure we're creating a process that's as fair as possible for students. So that may change in the future, but if it does, you'll probably be one of the first to know. So we can make sure that we get that out to applicants as well as any understanding as to why that might change.
If you have other questions, we have some time for some Q&A here for a couple minutes. What's next, right? CASPer, Snapshot, Duet, which I'm going to make a strong push again to change it to Tango. I like Tango better. Duet, what's next on the Altus roadmap?
I think one of the things that we're looking at is around how we can provide information to support that transition piece. So you and I have already talked a little bit about it, about how we can help support that learning environment for trainees when they first come in. So thinking about, is there any information that we can provide that comes from the admissions process that actually, when you get into that med school, that can help you have a successful first couple of months, in order to make sure you really, get your feet solidly on the ground. And so that may come in terms of Duet or other pieces of information like that, but just basically thinking about how we can support that process with the information that we have is one of the initiatives we're doing.
Any plans to take on the MCAT?
I think that's it's I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of ways that from an assessment perspective that you could think around. Oh, wouldn't it be interesting if it did this, or interesting if it did this? Right now, we're staying in our lane in terms of focusing on non-academic attributes, because that's really an area we feel is under assessed and undervalued, because we know, unfortunately, just in the way our process works, that unless you're assessing something, it's not given as much weight or importance. So unless people know it's counting, then it doesn't impact. And if you look at the AAMC's competencies, the ACGME competencies in Canada, the CanMeds roles, it's not just medical knowledge that matters to becoming a good physician. It's the whole picture. And so we're really focused on making sure that we can change the way people value these attributes, because they are fundamentally so important.
They are. Yes, they are. Something that we didn't talk about and always comes up question-wise with CASPer, typing speed is always a concern. Making sure that there's no typos and punctuation is perfect.
Right.
Students always have these concerns. Talk about what is actually being scored there.
Absolutely. So it is really just truly your content of your response. So some applicants use bullet points, some write full form sentences. For me, my typing speed actually isn't that great, so I would use bullet points as my particular strategy. But there's different ways that you can do it. We actually have all of our raters who assess CASPer complete a CASPer test. So they know what that time pressure is like. They have to try and construct their responses in that 5-minute window, so they understand how that feels and the pressure that everybody's under. They know that sometimes sentences get cut off because your 5 minutes has elapsed. They also know that you might type a different form of there, or you might misspell a word, or your words might be merged together. And that happens, and that's not taken into consideration. Similarly, with the grammar structure, they're instructed, minor spelling and grammar mistakes aren't something that we're worried about at all, because it's really about the content of what we're measuring. Having said that, though, we're not satisfied with just sitting and waiting and seeing how that's doing. And that's why we're exploring other response options that may be complementary to what we're doing, or may allow us to measure other attributes as well.